The airport was alive with noise, full of boarding calls, rolling suitcases, and hurried footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. In the middle of it all sat Blake, her hands folded tightly around a worn leather purse that held not just her passport and ticket, but also the last fragile pieces of her dignity. Her husband had been gone for over a year now, his laughter silenced by an illness that left her alone in the house they had built together. The children had grown distant in the months that followed, visiting only when they needed something, or when they had news that affected them more than her. She thought she was prepared for the loneliness of widowhood, but she hadn't expected betrayal to come from the ones she had raised. It had begun weeks earlier when her son, Mark, and his wife Tanya sat across from her in the living room. Tanya's voice had been smooth, coated in false concern, while Mark remained silent, shifting uneasily, as though he could not meet his mother's eyes. They had insisted it was time for her to leave Tennessee and live with them in Denver. They spoke of new beginnings, of safety, of being closer as a family. And though her instincts whispered that something was wrong, Blake had agreed. She sold her wedding pearls, a ring Jake had once saved 3 months' salary to buy, and quietly used the money to prepare for the move. All she carried with her now was one suitcase, a folder of papers, and the memory of Jake's voice reminding her to be strong. At the airport, reality revealed itself in a cruel, deliberate moment. Tanya had handed her the ticket, the edges already worn as if it had been handled many times. Blake's fingers trembled when she saw the details. A one-way ticket, not a return, not even the courtesy of the pretense of care. When she looked up, Tanya's eyes were cold, sharp with the satisfaction of a plan completed. "We only bought you a one-way ticket," she said flatly, her words slicing through the noise around them. Mark said nothing, only stood there with guilt swimming in his eyes. That silence hurt more than Tanya's words. It confirmed what Blake already feared. She was no longer seen as a mother, only as a burden to be discarded. She left the terminal before the tears could fully escape, carrying herself past strangers who glanced briefly at the older woman holding her purse like a lifeline. She found a bench, cold beneath her, and sank into it as though her body weighed 1,000 pounds. Her mind replayed the image of Jake's last days, the hospital bed set against the warm light of their bedroom, his hand squeezing hers with a strength that surprised her. He had whispered then, "Promise me, Blake, you won't let them walk over you. You have more in you than they'll ever know." At the time, she had nodded just to comfort him. Now, sitting alone, she realized it had been more than comfort. It had been a command. Her hand searched inside the purse until they closed around a thin envelope, its corners soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. Inside was a single business card from J.R. Parker, her husband's trusted lawyer, given to her quietly at the funeral. "If you ever need me, don't hesitate," he had said. She had held on to it without knowing why. Now, she understood. With a shaky breath, she dialed his number. The phone rang twice before his familiar, steady voice answered, and in that moment, Blake knew she was not helpless. The fear that had clawed at her chest began to loosen. There was a path forward, and she intended to take it. The cab ride back through Tennessee's streets was both painful and liberating. Every storefront, every corner reminded her of the life she had lived with Jake. Simple, filled with small routines that had built a lifetime of love. But as the car carried her closer to the lawyer's office, she began to feel a shift inside herself. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she was not moving according to someone else's plan. She was choosing her own steps, reclaiming her own voice. By the time she stepped out of the cab, her spine was straighter, her shoulders squared, her grief tempered by resolve. The meeting with J.R. Parker was quiet, but decisive. He listened as she told him everything, her voice breaking at times, but never faltering. When she finished, he pushed the will across the desk, and together they began to rewrite it line by line. Mark and Tanya's names were removed without hesitation. In their place, Blake added Elder Haven, a modest yet respected home for seniors just outside town, a place she had heard about through friends, but never thought she would need. Her house would be sold, the money used to ensure she could live out her days in dignity, surrounded by people who valued community rather than convenience. The pen in her hand shook as she signed, but the final stroke of her signature felt like a key turning in a long locked door. When she left her home for the last time, she did not take much. Only Jake's favorite chair, a quilt he had always pulled over her shoulders during winter nights, and a box of photographs. At Willow Grove, the walls were warm with light, the air filled with quiet laughter. For the first time in months, she felt welcome. 6 months later, Blake's life was no longer shadowed by betrayal, but lit by small joys. She spent her mornings in watercolor classes, afternoons at book club, and evenings in gentle yoga sessions that made her body feel alive again. The staff knew her by name, the other residents by her smile, and slowly she began to discover a peace she had thought impossible. Mark called once or twice, his number flashing on the phone, but she let it ring until it stopped. An email came too, full of anger and disbelief. "We didn't think you'd actually go through with it." She read it once, calmly, and then pressed delete. At night, she often sat by the small table in her room, a candle burning softly beside a framed photograph of Jake. The flame flickered against his smile, and she spoke to him in whispers. "You were right," she said one evening, her voice steady. "I am stronger than they know. I didn't let them take everything. I kept myself." Her eyes closed, and for the first time since his passing, she felt not just survival, but something more. She felt alive.